to push the panic button, to give way to panic in a distressing situation, to become very worried about something bad that happens and react suddenly instead of thinking about it calmly. Pan was a Greek god whose powerful scream could stir up fear and disorder in a crowd. Thus the word panic, a sudden, overwhelming fear that leads to hysterical or irrational behavior and may swiftly spread through a group of people or animals. We live in chaotic times. Hurricanes, floods, and blizzards seem to be increasingly capricious, widespread, and deadly. The economy in the United States and around the world is in a mess. Huge masses of refugees wander the planet trying to find a place to lay their heads. America's long-standing position as the respected, all-powerful leader of the free world is crumbling before our eyes. This certainly seems like a logical time for people, particularly Americans, to be subject to panic. And there are plenty of individuals and groups, particularly in the religious world, that seem more than glad to oblige by offering great big panic buttons to push. If you weren't at the edge of panic on your own about world conditions, they will be glad to send into your home a never-ending stream of articles, books, radio and TV broadcasts, blogs, and YouTube videos that will fill your mind and emotions to overflowing with reasons to panic. One of the most panic-inducing ministries in recent years was Family Radio, headed by self-made prophet Harold Camping. In early 2011, Camping issued an ironclad warning that God was going to remove all faithful true believers out of the world, taking them to heaven on May 21st that year. Left behind would be everyone else to suffer through 5 months of disastrous hell on earth, beginning with powerful earthquakes that very day and followed by all sorts of cataclysms. All of it would end on October 21st, 2011, with the destruction of the whole earth by fire. Camping and his ministry claimed that those dates were 100% accurate and beyond dispute, and that the Bible guaranteed them. Camping was convinced that 200 million or so people would be taken to heaven, but 99% of them would be resurrected people from the past, such as the ancient Bible prophets. They would come back to life and then be joined by the current group still alive that was known as the elect, a group that he estimated to be only somewhere between 2,000 and 20,000 people. The other 7 billion people alive on Earth would be turned to toast. Leading up to May 21st, Harold and his supporters were getting the word out via billboards, radio programs, and the Family Radio website. As the date got closer, a fleet of 5 Family Radio RVs, emblazoned with Camping's message, hit the road crisscrossing the U.S. Some ministry supporters even had it imprinted on their own vehicles. And Camping's followers in many cities hit the streets, displaying placards and passing out flyers. Camping's proclamations about the 2011 apocalypse were based on an elaborate system of mathematical calculations and idiosyncratic interpretations of Bible passages he had been developing for years. To outsiders, it all appeared to be a bunch of nonsense, but to his dedicated followers, it was the gospel truth. As a result of the barrage of publicity, Harold Camping's name had certainly become widely known. Googling it back in the year 2011 yielded 222,000 hits. The mobile billboards manned by Harold's troops in early 2011 supplemented 1,200 or so stationary giant billboards all over the U.S. and 2,000 billboards overseas, including South America, Russia, India, Taiwan, Europe, and Africa. All had been paid for by donations from Campingites in general, and the zealous, smaller group that took an active part in spreading the warning in particular, such as these two. First was Robert Fitzpatrick, a 60-year-old retired transit worker from Staten Island, invested his entire life savings of $140,000 into the specific project of plastering ads on the walls of subways and bus stop shelters in New York City. "I'm trying to warn people about what's coming," Fitzpatrick told the New York Daily News. "People who have an understanding of end times have an obligation to warn everyone." and second was 27-year-old Adrian Martinez of New York City, one of the foot soldiers like those shown here passing out pamphlets. Adrian told NPR Radio in an interview that knowing the date of the end of the world changes all your future plans. So she changed her plans to go to medical school. She and her husband Joel quit their jobs, and they moved to Orlando, where they rented a home and got busy passing out tracts about doomsday. Joel said that they were spending the last of their savings because they didn't see any need for the surplus. You know, you think about retirement and stuff like that, he said. What's the point of having some money just sitting there? We budgeted everything so that on May 21st, we won't have anything left, Adrian added. What happened to Harold and his followers when his prophecies failed? Common sense would dictate that he would have felt humiliated and would slink off into hiding, perhaps dying a broken man. After all, he was 89 years old that year anyway. Common sense would dictate that all of his followers would be astonished, disappointed, disillusioned, and maybe embarrassed and even angry that someone could so effectively hoodwink them. Common sense would dictate they would all thus abandon camping and his theories and get on with their lives. Common sense would be wrong. The authors of the well-known social psychology text When Prophecy Fails, published in 1956, introduced the term cognitive dissonance and explained its application to circumstances like that of Harold Camping's followers. Cognitive dissonance is the uncomfortable feeling inside your head that you have when you find yourself attempting to accept inside your mind two conflicting ideas. The When Prophecy Fails book described what happens to people when they believe a prophetic scenario with all their hearts and minds, and then the scenario doesn't come to pass. The conclusion was that in such situations, the believers will be faced with the extreme discomfort of cognitive dissonance. If the belief was just an intellectual exercise, when the disconfirming event occurs, you can just relieve the uncomfortable feeling by changing your mind and admitting the error. But if the believers have invested time and money and energy and emotions into the belief and have made perhaps even irreversible choices based on it, like foregoing marriage or quitting college, it will not be so easy to merely give it up. In such circumstances, some true believers, instead of giving up their erroneous ideas, will make elaborate excuses for the failures of the prediction, and rather than crawl away in embarrassment, will enthusiastically pour themselves into even greater efforts to make new converts. This is the way the mind hides the dissonance. If, through convoluted reasoning and smoke and mirrors, they can convince enough people to agree with their crazy failed idea, it'll cease to be crazy. I had read When Prophecy Fails for a social psychology course clear back in the 1970s. It came to mind immediately in early 2011 when I first heard of the camping group. So I decided to watch their activities closely and see if the conclusions the When Prophecy Fails authors had come to were applicable in this situation. If they were, I expected once the May 21st date came and went that camping would publicly show neither regret nor embarrassment for misleading so many people. He would very promptly create an apologetics for what caused the expected rapture to not materialize on schedule. None of it would include any error or wrong on his part. I also expected that he would lose a certain percentage of supporters who would be truly disillusioned that his bombastic, dogmatic statements turned out to be false. Some would just be disappointed in Harold, others would be disappointed in, or maybe even angry at, God for allowing them to be hoodwinked even though their enthusiasm was so sincere. But I expected that there would be a core group of true believers who would forge onward to zealously support whatever new path Harold decided to take. I didn't base this just on the theory of cognitive dissonance. I based it also on the fact that Harold had done all of this before. He declared, just as dogmatically, almost 20 years earlier, that the rapture would be in 1994. He set various dates for that year, and as each one came and went, he just recalculated and set a new date. He never quit his wild-eyed speculation between that year and 2011, and always managed to keep many of his longtime followers and gain new ones. His ministry had been a textbook case for the cognitive dissonance theory for many years. In early 2011, I was thoroughly convinced that on May 22nd, there would be a lot of people needing to figure out how to get their lives out of the mess they had put them in because of believing camping's damned foolishness. And it wouldn't be just adults who bought into the foolishness who would be harmed either, and that is probably the greatest tragedy of all. Listen to the words of one young woman in her 20s who was affected by camping's previous prophetic fiasco in 1994. She wrote the following on an internet forum where camping's latest fiasco was being discussed. My parents told me the world was going to end in 1994 as Harold Camping had drilled into their minds when I was about 11 years old. They took me and my 3 sisters out of public school because of this, and also told all of us that we had to tell all of our friends about God and the end of the world, because if God didn't save them, they would burn in hell. I remember having trouble sleeping at night, thinking about my friends screaming in terror, begging for the boulders to fall and smash them so they wouldn't have to face God. While the sky was burning, the moon was the color of blood, and the heavens rolled up like a scroll, and the stars fell. Need I go on? That's some creepy stuff. She was talking not about evil men someday facing the wrath of God. She was talking about her grade school friends whom she expected to be left behind in a 1994 flaming doomsday. And then there was Marcia Palladines. Young Marcia was pregnant, her baby due to be born May 27th. A reporter visited her and her husband John in their apartment in early May. They were both followers of Harold Camping and believed that the end of the world was coming on May 21st. This photo was taken in their apartment to accompany the interview. The reporter wrote, "She caresses the bulge of her belly, smiling and shedding a tear as she feels the baby's slight kicks. This may be one of her last memories of him, she thinks. Judgment Day followers believe that for those who are saved, there will be no recollection of the pains or pleasures of earth while in heaven. God is in control. I have prayed for mercy on my baby," Palladine says, crying, "but I don't know what's going to happen. If I'm here May 21st, then I will suffer the consequences of the wrath of God. I know, like anybody else, I'll deserve it, because none of us are perfect." Back at the time, for many people reading about Harold Camping's Judgment Day scenario, it seemed little more than a comical diversion from the boring news about politics and finances. It was certainly fodder for jokes, including routines on the late-night TV shows and cartoon strips like Doonesbury. Camping may have seemed like just a con artist, and his followers like buffoons who would just be getting on May 22nd what they deserved for being so gullible. But that's until you had a face to put to those followers and their children, and read their first-person stories. Here's a young man who was posting shortly before May 21st that year on a forum where Camping's followers and detractors rubbed shoulders. "I used to believe in this date and worry about it all the time. I didn't eat, I didn't sleep, and then guess what? I found my sister dead in her bedroom. My sister, who I could have spent so much more time with if I hadn't been sitting around worrying about it." He indicated he planned to spend May 21st going to the movies with his grandmother. I'll bet his grandmother was one relieved lady. But many young people, from children to teens, were not able to push beyond what adults had shoved down their throats. Looking back on this fiasco, we may be able to joke about Harold Camping and call him a foolish old goat, which he was. We may be able to gleefully hope that he and the most cantankerous and blustery and self-righteous among his followers got their comeuppance on that May 21st morning when the only thing destroyed was their own plans to be winging their way to heaven. But Marcia Palladines' situation was no joke. She was truly in emotional pain that she didn't deserve. And Marcia was only one public face on what no doubt was a large, faceless crowd around the world of equally innocent and naive people. The flurry of activity around the announcement campaign built up to a climax on Friday afternoon, May 20th, when planes flew banners with the messages of doom in the skies over 42 U.S. and Canadian cities. By late Friday, Harold himself was ensconced in a motel room somewhere in California with his wife, waiting to watch the news channels begin reporting the predicted earthquakes. Out on the internet, I had discovered on that Friday a forum of camping followers from around the world. I logged on to the forum just as their excitement was building up to a fever pitch. Posts were coming fast and furious by evening. The first earthquake effect was expected to begin at the international dateline in the South Pacific, just after midnight Eastern U.S. time. The effect would then roll westward, reaching the first major populated area, New Zealand, about 2 hours later. Some were posting links to seismic activity websites so forumites could keep tabs on the earthquakes as they happened. Others posted links to live webcams from New Zealand so they could actually watch the devastation as it happened long before it reached their own time zone, except for the few members who were from New Zealand or nearby Australia. Some folks were posting their goodbyes on the forum, expecting the next time they heard from the other participants, they would all be winging their way to heaven together in the rapture. You could almost hear everyone holding their breath as the 0 hour approached. I scrolled down the forum as the minutes ticked by. 11:29 p.m. Well, it's about a half hour until Judgment Day in New Zealand. 12:05 a.m. Can't stay awake. We'll record 6 hours of CNN while sleeping. 2:04 a.m. Greetings from Sydney. Not too long until we're taken home by our Father. I have to admit I'm excited and a bit scared. I trust in God, yet fear still seeps in. I just hope my bit of fear doesn't prevent me from joining you all. I'm with a large group of brothers and sisters that have come together for the momentous occasion right now. We're all prepared to shed our flesh, ascend to be with the Father. Bless you all, my brethren, and if it be God's will, I will see you soon. 4:09 a.m. from Sydney. As of 42 minutes ago, there were 36 missing persons reports filed in Masterton, New Zealand. My friend from that area told me that people are growing very concerned, and a councilman has been trying to take a roll call of all the government officials, and several are not answering. It seems that some of our brothers may have already taken flight. I can't verify any of this, though. I can only take my other brothers at their word. But it's exciting to think that us folk may soon hear heaven's music. And then nothing. Seismic activity websites showed just the usual minor earthquakes in scattered locations. Live webcams showed that it was a ho-hum Saturday night in New Zealand with no earthquake devastation in sight, including in Masterton, where evidently most of the missing people were eventually found. News channels around the U.S. reported nothing more exciting than the latest celebrity scandals or sports scores or military skirmishes in the Middle East. As the hours after midnight passed, it became obvious that something in the timing was wrong. But all this did was cause a quick regrouping of thought and speculation. Lots of speculation. 4:30 a.m. If a day is reckoned from midnight to midnight, then the rapture will occur at about 11:59 on May 21st Jerusalem time, when the day transitions from the last day of salvation to the first day of judgment. 5:17. Amen. I think you summed it up well. Judgment will probably come at either sunset or midnight Jerusalem time. If I recall correctly, some of us were entertaining this idea before Mr. Camping introduced the New Zealand timeline. Wonderfully, God has given us a few hours to soak this in. It's really ironic that Judgment Day will still come as a thief in the night to the world, even though they heard the May 21st warning. Fear God and give glory to Him. But as is obvious now, years later, midnight finally came everywhere around the globe. May 21st came and went, and nothing predicted had happened. You might say Harold Camping and his followers created and launched their own guaranteed, unsinkable Titanic theory. It finally crashed into an iceberg of reality, and it sank. But most didn't go down with the ship. They just sank deeper down into titanic denial, and the saga continued. Harold Camping himself was indeed befuddled at first. An article in the San Francisco Chronicle on May 22nd described his response. "It has been a really tough weekend," said Harold Camping, the 89-year-old fundamentalist radio preacher who convinced hundreds of his followers that the rapture would occur on Saturday at 6 p.m. But on Sunday, almost 18 hours after he thought he'd be in heaven, there was Camping, flabbergasted. Birds chirped, a gentle breeze blew. Across the street, neighbors focused on their yard work and the latest neighborhood gossip. "I'm looking for answers," Camping said, adding that meant frequent prayer and consultations with friends. "But now I have nothing else to say," he said, closing the door to his home. "I'll be back to work Monday, and I will say more then." On the main internet forums where his supporters huddled to discuss the aftermath, there was indeed a lot of befuddlement. Participants seemed shell-shocked at first, but few seemed ready to abandon ship. At all. They were still so convinced of the airtight arguments Harold had presented for the May 21st date that even the reality that the date failed miserably didn't dissuade them from still hanging on to his chronology. On Monday evening, May 23rd, Harold Camping showed back up at the family radio studios for a live broadcast of his call-in show, Open Forum, along with a short press conference at the end. If anyone was waiting for an apology from Harold Camping for his prophetic failure, for regrets expressed for people's lives being torn up by foolish decisions and sacrifices they have made to be part of his rapture brigade, they were quickly disappointed. Sure enough, Harold Camping didn't fall on his sword over the failure of his prophecy. He just fell back on the tried and true gimmick of saying that he had merely misunderstood, that God had never intended to do something visible on May 21st. It wasn't the time for the rapture or the beginning destruction of the earth. No, instead God did something invisible. He closed the door to salvation. And how would anyone prove that he hadn't done that? They couldn't. It's a fail-safe declaration. No apologies, no regrets, no sympathy for supporters, nothing but excuses, and a revised explanation of the timeline. Family Radio and Harold Camping just doubled down on the prediction about the destruction of the earth that was going to come on October 21st. Harold announced a few days after May 21st, "We're not going to be passing any more tracts or put up any more billboards or advertising in any way about Judgment Day. That's all done. The world has been warned. We did our little share, and boy, did the media pick it up. Now the world has been told that it's under judgment. The great earthquake and rapture and the universe melting in fervent heat will be happening on the last day, October 21st, 2011. It's all going to happen on the last day." Harold Camping was obviously completely comfortable with his new understanding. It was, however, of little comfort to those whose lives were torn apart by the May 21st debacle. Asked by the press on May 23rd what advice he had for those who no longer had their jobs or homes or savings, he insisted that the economic problems in the nation had left many people with the same issues. So those who were victims of his prophetic scheme should use the same solutions. As he put it, people cope. They could move in with friends or family, look for new jobs, get public welfare. Did Family Radio have any obligation to help any of them? Of course not. No one, including him, had ever ordered anyone to make any sacrifices. It was all of their own free will. So they just needed to rely on God to help them through the rough time. Not Harold Camping. People like this man, a driver of one of the vehicles in the roving caravan, who posted on the internet in June. "To all my wonderful friends, I am fine, but I'm not able to get internet and no phone. I'm fine, though, and would appreciate your prayers because, like so many others, I am homeless, jobless, and penniless. But fret not, I am rich in Christ and will be in touch as things improve. I need assistance. Can you let someone know I need housing for a while I find work? Family radio cannot help any of us who were drivers on Project Caravan. We just arrived in Grass Valley, California, and there are some of us who are absolutely in dire straits. They won't even let us live in the RVs until we are able to find a home or get work. And what about those left not just with physical problems, but emotional turmoil, such as this forum poster who wrote on Memorial Day 2011. I am missing my folks this Memorial Day. I am embarrassed to tell you, on the wee hours before May 21st, I got the stool out and climbed up to the cupboard where the ashes of my parents are kept. I believed the dead in Christ would rise first and then me. I had hoped to catch a glimpse of Mama and Mr. Dad. I fell asleep holding my Bible in one arm and the can of ashes in the other arm. Like the rest, the wake-up of that day was excruciatingly horrible. And then came a shocker. On June 9, 2011, Camping, age 89 at the time, suffered a stroke which affected his verbal communication. He never went back to preaching, but the family radio ministry still stuck with his October 21st prediction, as did many of his followers. They stayed the course on the way to the iceberg. One of those followers was an engineer who had spent most of his retirement savings, well over $500,000, taking out full-page newspaper ads and buying an RV that he had custom painted with doomsday warnings. Even when pressed by a reporter before the October 21st deadline, he wasn't willing to admit any doubts about whether October 21st would really, finally be it. How can everything we've learned be a lie? But, of course, all of it was actually a lie. October 21st came and went. No earthquake, no fiery destruction of Earth, no rapture. But old Harold Camping didn't have to answer for the lie. He was already out of the public eye as a result of his stroke, inaccessible to the faithful who had followed him to the bitter end. As he'd done many times before, he simply abandoned his former followers, leaving them to figure out how to alleviate their cognitive dissonance and how to put their lives back together. And then Harold Camping died December 15th, 2013, at age 92, as a result of complications from a fall in his home 2 weeks earlier. But don't worry, there were lots of other wannabe prophets out there to fill the void and keep pushing the panic button to keep the whole hellish cycle going. They have their TV shows and books and charts, and I don't doubt even some of Harold Camping's ex-followers have already blinded their eyes again and followed off after one more goofy prophetic guru. For some, that seems less painful than just admitting reality.